the story of Nelson Mandela, from prisoner to president. What if I told you that a man spent 27 years in prison, only to emerge and become president of the very nation that imprisoned him? Not only that, but instead of seeking revenge, he chose forgiveness and unity. This isn't fiction. This is the extraordinary true story of Nelson Mandela. In the next 10 minutes, you'll discover how a lawyer became a revolutionary, survived decades of imprisonment, and ultimately transformed a divided nation. And stick around until the end, because Mandela's final years reveal something about leadership that few people know, but everyone should learn. Hey there, welcome back to the channel where we explore the lives that changed history. Before we dive in, if you're new here, consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell so you never miss our weekly stories of remarkable people. Today, we're examining the life of Nelson Mandela, a man whose journey from prisoner 46664 to president reshaped South Africa and inspired millions worldwide. Born Rolihlahla Mandela on July 18, 1918, in the small village of Mvizo, South Africa, he was given the name Nelson by a teacher who couldn't pronounce his African name, a common practice during colonial times. Have you ever wondered how something as personal as your own name could be taken from you? This was just one small example of the systemic discrimination that defined South Africa. Mandela was born into the royal family of the Thembu tribe. His father, Gadla Henry Mfakani-Iswa, was a local chief and counselor to the monarch. After his father's death, when Nelson was just 9 years old, he was adopted by Chief John Jintaba Dalandibo, the acting regent of the Thembu people. Growing up in the royal household provided Mandela with privileges many black South Africans didn't have, including access to education. He attended a Wesleyan mission school, then Clarkberry Boarding Institute, and later Healdtown, a prestigious secondary school. He became the first in his family to attend college, enrolling at the University of Fort Hare, the only Western-style higher learning institute for black South Africans at the time. But here's what makes Mandela's story so compelling. Despite his relatively privileged upbringing, he chose to fight for those who had no voice. What would you have done in his position? Would you have used your advantages to seek personal success, or risked everything for a greater cause? In 1941, Mandela fled to Johannesburg to avoid an arranged marriage. This move changed the trajectory of his life. While completing his BA through correspondence courses with the University of South Africa and studying law at the University of Witwatersrand, Mandela became increasingly aware of the racial injustice around him. In 1944, Mandela joined the African National Congress, ANC, an organization working to end white minority rule and racial segregation. That same year, alongside Oliver Tambo and Walter Sisulu, he helped form the ANC Youth League, pushing the organization toward more direct action against apartheid, South Africa's system of institutionalized racial segregation. But here's what few people realize about Mandela during this period. He initially advocated for nonviolent protest, following the examples of Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. In fact, the ANC's 1952 Defiance Campaign, which Mandela helped organize, was based entirely on peaceful civil disobedience. The question that haunted Mandela during this time was, can peaceful resistance succeed against a government willing to use violence to maintain power? What would you have done, facing a system that responded to peaceful protests with bullets? In 1948, the National Party came to power in South Africa and formalized the already existing racial segregation into the system known as apartheid. This policy dictated where black South Africans could live, work, and travel. It denied them basic rights and citizenship in their own country. Under apartheid, the population was classified by race, with different rights for different groups. White South Africans, though the minority, controlled the government, economy, and most of the land. Black South Africans couldn't vote, couldn't own property in most areas, and were forced to carry identification passes. As peaceful protests were met with increasing violence from the government, culminating in the 1960 Sharpeville massacre, where police killed 69 peaceful demonstrators, Mandela reluctantly concluded that armed resistance might be necessary. In 1961, he co-founded Umkhonto we Sizwe, Spear of the Nation, the armed wing of the ANC. Does this surprise you? The man known worldwide as a symbol of peace once believed armed struggle was necessary. What would push a man dedicated to non-violence to this conclusion? In 1962, after 17 months underground, Mandela was arrested. Initially sentenced to 5 years for leaving the country illegally and inciting workers to strike, he soon faced more serious charges. In what became known as the Rivonia trial, Mandela and 7 others were charged with sabotage and conspiracy to overthrow the government, crimes punishable by death. Rather than denying his actions, Mandela used the trial to explain his beliefs, delivering a 4-hour speech from the dock that would become one of history's most famous statements on freedom. During my lifetime, he declared, I have dedicated myself to the struggle of the African people. I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die. The world watched as Mandela was sentenced to life imprisonment. On June 12, 1964, he was transported to Robben Island, where he would spend 18 of his 27 years behind bars. Have you ever wondered what keeps someone's spirit alive during 27 years of imprisonment? What inner strength allowed Mandela not just to survive, but to emerge with his convictions intact? Life on Robben Island was designed to break men's spirits. Mandela was assigned the lowest classification as a political prisoner. He slept on a straw mat in a small cell and spent his days breaking rocks in a limestone quarry, work that permanently damaged his eyes and lungs. But here's what's truly remarkable. Mandela used his time in prison to grow intellectually and spiritually. He studied, creating what prisoners called Mandela University, teaching fellow inmates about history, politics, and law. He learned Afrikaans, the language of his captors, believing that to truly understand your opponent, you must speak their language. Perhaps most crucially, Mandela developed an extraordinary capacity for empathy. He befriended his guards, learning about their lives and families. He came to understand that many white South Africans were also victims of the apartheid system, victims of fear and ignorance. This period reveals something profound about Mandela's character. While in prison, he could have allowed hatred to consume him. Instead, he chose understanding. He later wrote, "No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love." What would you have done with those 27 years? Could you have transformed suffering into wisdom as Mandela did? By the 1980s, international pressure against apartheid was mounting. Economic sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and global protests were weakening the South African government's resolve. In 1985, then President P.W. Botha offered Mandela his freedom if he renounced violence. Mandela refused, saying, "Only free men can negotiate. Prisoners cannot enter into contracts." It wasn't until F.W. de Klerk became president in 1989 that real change began. On February 11th, 1990, after 27 years behind bars, Mandela walked free. Television cameras broadcast the moment worldwide as he raised his fist in triumph. Not as a gesture of defiance, but of victory. What few people realize is that Mandela's greatest work was still ahead of him. At 71 years old, when most people would be enjoying retirement, he began the monumental task of negotiating the end of apartheid. The negotiations were fraught with danger. Political violence threatened to derail the process multiple times. Yet through it all, Mandela maintained his commitment to creating a rainbow nation where all South Africans, black and white, could live together in peace. Here's something to consider. How did a man who had every reason to seek revenge choose reconciliation instead? What vision of the future gave him the strength to forgive? On April 27th, 1994, South Africa held its first democratic elections with universal suffrage. People lined up for hours, sometimes days, to cast their votes. The ANC won by a landslide, and on May 10, 1994, Nelson Mandela was inaugurated as South Africa's first black president. The symbolism was profound. The man who had been prisoner number 4666 for now led the nation that had imprisoned him. As he took the oath of office, South African Air Force jets flew overhead in salute, the same military that had once hunted him as a terrorist. But Mandela's true genius emerged in how he governed. Understanding that reconciliation was essential for South Africa's future, he made extraordinary gestures of forgiveness. He invited his former jailers to his inauguration. He had tea with the widow of Hendrik Verwoerd, the architect of apartheid. And perhaps most famously, he supported the South African rugby team, long a symbol of white Afrikaner nationalism, during the 1995 Rugby World Cup. When South Africa won that tournament, Mandela, wearing the team's jersey, presented the trophy to Captain Francois Pienaar. That moment, captured in the film Invictus, symbolized the birth of a new South Africa. During his single 5-year term as president, Mandela oversaw the creation of one of the world's most progressive constitutions, established the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to address the wounds of apartheid, and laid the groundwork for economic development. But his greatest achievement was this. He showed the world that South Africa could transition from oppression to democracy without descending into civil war. How many leaders have the wisdom to know when their work is done? In 1999, at age 80, Mandela stepped down after one term as president. Another remarkable decision in a continent where many leaders cling to power. He continued his humanitarian work through the Nelson Mandela Foundation, focusing on HIV, AIDS awareness, and education. Mandela passed away on December 5, 2013, at the age of 95. His funeral was attended by nearly 100 heads of state and dignitaries from around the world, one of the largest gatherings of world leaders in history. Today, Nelson Mandela's legacy lives on not just in South Africa, but globally. His name has become synonymous with moral courage, forgiveness, and the fight for justice. The United Nations declared his birthday, July 18th, as Nelson Mandela International Day, a day dedicated to community service. But perhaps Mandela's greatest legacy is this. He showed us that one person's moral courage can change the course of history. He demonstrated that reconciliation is not weakness, but strength. And he proved that no injustice, no matter how entrenched, is permanent if people are willing to stand against it. As we reflect on Mandela's extraordinary journey from prisoner to president, consider this. What seemingly impossible changes might be possible in our world today if we applied Mandela's principles of persistence, forgiveness, and moral courage? Nelson Mandela once said, "It always seems impossible until it's done." His life embodied this philosophy, transforming the impossible into reality through unwavering determination and a vision of a better future. The story of Mandela teaches us that true greatness lies not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall. It reminds us that the most powerful weapon we have is not violence, but unwavering commitment to our highest ideals. What impossible dream are you working toward? What injustice in your world needs someone to stand against it? Remember Mandela's words. What counts in life is not the mere fact that we have lived. It is what difference we have made to the lives of others. If you found Mandela's story inspiring, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message of courage and perseverance, share this video with them.